It is estimated that 16% of companies are fully remote, and that 1 in 5 employees work remotely. And they say that by 2025, 32.6 billion Americans will become remote workers. Now, according to the Canadian government, these are the positive effects of remote work, and these are the negative. And you can see that when they discuss ways to try and fix this, they use very uncertain language that I've highlighted there in yellow, and that's where my thesis comes in. So I plan to study exploring different moderators between working in different virtual arrangements and how that can affect workplace loneliness. It is a proposal. Unfortunately, I've had a very interesting time with ethics, but on a happy note, my lovely supervisor is Dr. Johanna Weststar. So moving on, I'm going to start with a brief evolution of remote work. So starting us off in the 1960s, remote work is thought of as briefcases stuffed with paperwork. And around this same time, we see a German aerospace engineering company start using flex time for the first time and letting some employees work from home. We also see the US Department of Defense create the first prototype of the internet, which obviously is very important. By the 1970s, we have phone calls and floppy disks. And I did have to Google what a floppy disk was. And I put a photo there if you also didn't know, like I did not. And also in the 70s, we have Jack Niles becomes the father of telecommuting. And this is from a book he writes that talks about how telecommuting saves on resources and time. And we also see the creation of flexible work arrangement policies. By the 1980s, we're seeing more remote work. JCPenney has remote call centers. And at this time, Bill Gates also develops Windows. And by the 1990s, national telecommuting initiatives are being promoted in the United States. Moving on to the 2000s, we have the rise of handheld technology, and we see the iPhone being invented in 2007. We also get technological advancements like Slack and Skype, and we see the rise of non-standardized work. By 2010, we have large companies starting to question what the benefits or the hazards are of using remote work. Fast forward to 2020, we have the COVID-19 pandemic that forces most jobs to become virtual. And we see this gap close between having to work in the same space physically and having organizational efficiency. New technologies get developed that allow for distance collaboration, like online coffee breaks and things like that. And we see an acceptance of working from home. And at this time, we start to see an influx of e-workers. So where are we today? Well, remote work today, as of 2023, is 4 times the amount compared to 2019. It's increased by a factor of 5 in job advertisements that companies are using as an incentive to employees. And employees are really enjoying the positives of remote work, things like saving time on commuting and grooming. And research has found that the flexibility of remote work does improve job autonomy and work-life balance and connection. Now, yes, there are positives of remote work, but as the government showed, there are also negative. We've seen a general increase in social isolation, and this is seen also from a loss of informal interactions. A qualitative study found that employees were missing sentiments such as water cooler breaks and lunch dates and celebrating birthdays in office. And I think this is really demonstrated in a recent report that found 1 in 5 employees report to feeling lonely. 25% of fully virtual employees report to feeling lonely, and that is a number significantly higher than those who work fully in person. And as you may expect, hybrid workers fall in the middle, and 21% of them report to feeling lonely. So what are we doing to help these workers? Well, that's where my research objectives come in. So first, I plan to examine the relationship between those 3 different work arrangements, the fully virtual, in-person, and hybrid, and how that relates to workplace loneliness. My second objective is to explore how different technology and job design elements may moderate the relationship between those 2 variables. Starting us off with my first objective, it is essentially a lack of relational needs and desired quality relationships with other people in your organization. Now, they believe that there are two subtypes. The first is social companionship at work, which is like having somebody to eat lunch with and having a friend group. The second type is emotional deprivation, and that's you may feel alienated at work or having a lack of camaraderie. So essentially, overall, my first objective is proposing that there's a relationship between these two variables. And I think as the research has shown that employees are feeling socially isolated and some form of loneliness. And so I also hypothesize that hybrid workers will report the highest rates of workplace loneliness. Moving on to my second objective, looking at some moderators. The first moderator I focus on is job design, and job design is essentially the elements and attributes of a job structure. And job design has a really long history, as I'm sure you may expect. And so I chose to focus on two specific theories most relevant to my research, and that is socio-technical systems theory by Tristan Bamforth and job characteristics theory by Hackman and Oldham. So beginning with SST, this theory offers that within an organization, there are two systems. There's a technical system and a social system. And the technical system is made up of like the knowledge and tools we learn at work. And the social system is the people in that organization. And those come together to form organizational outcomes. So when the two systems are harmonious, we see organizational outcomes like higher worker productivity and higher satisfaction. Now, putting this into the context of my project in remote work, when those systems are disharmonious, that's when we could potentially start seeing those negative outcomes like workplace loneliness. So I propose that one of my moderators is different communication mediums, because it may be that the social and technical system for remote workers is not being optimized or harmonized appropriately right now. And that could be why we are potentially seeing workplace loneliness. Moving on to the second theory, that's job characteristics theory. So the researchers who came up with this theorized that there's a bunch of job characteristics and they affect the psychological states of employees, and that therefore affects outcomes of both the employee and the organization. Now, I chose to focus on the social job design characteristics. One study examined technostress, which is essentially stress induced from technology, and they used that previous SST theory and found that if you can optimize both the technical and social systems through job design, they were able to see a decrease in technostress. And that is why my other moderator looks at social job design characteristics. But what are they? Well, the first is feedback from others, which is essentially just the feedback you get from others in the organization on a day-to-day basis. Next is interdependence, which is the extent of dependency for work completion. Now, there are two subtypes of this one. The first is received, which is essentially my job cannot be done unless others do their job. And the second is initiated, which is unless my job gets done, somebody else can't do their job. And I think if you think of a working line in like a factory, like that kind of helps explain that concept, like an assembly line. Next, we have social support, which is the extent to which your job allows you to get advice and interact with others in the organization. And then finally, we have interaction outside the organization, which is the extent to which your job allows you to interact with people outside of the company. And that's things like holiday parties and things like that. So this is an overview of what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that these two constructs will moderate the relationship between virtual work arrangements and workplace loneliness. And I will briefly draw your attention here. Those are the communication mediums that I've decided to focus on for my project. I'm going to briefly walk you through my methodology. So I plan to sample 300 workers from the 3 different work arrangements, and that's my eligibility criteria. I am going to do an online survey, and those are some of the measures I'm going to use. And finally, I will analyze my data using moderated regression analysis. To leave you with a few potential implications of my research, the first is my research has the potential to offer best practices from evidence-based research on both social and technical job design elements for all 3 different types of remote work arrangements. Additionally, it could help us figure out the types of technologies that will best facilitate that social and emotional interaction for e-workers. Additionally, it could assist in ways that we could structure virtual work to mitigate experiences of workplace loneliness, and those could be those social job design characteristics or the technology that people are using. And finally, can provide insight into the differential experiences of workplace loneliness across each of those different virtual work arrangements and in person. And finally, there's one thing I'd like to leave you with. So I took these hashtags off of LinkedIn. And if I can draw your attention to the ones in purple, you'll see words like success and transformation and revolution. And Harvard is deeming this our work from anywhere future. And I say, well, if we know that employees are experiencing negative impacts of remote work and it is our future, then I think more research needs to be done to make it a success, to ensure that we are maximizing the positive elements and minimizing the negative elements of remote work. And yeah, thank you so much.